I think one of the strangest things about being human is that we spend our entire lives chasing something that we can never really explain. Something that everyone wants. Something that everyone talks about. Something that every person in some way is trying to find. And that thing is happiness. But the weird thing is, most of us never actually stop and question why we're chasing. We just assume we know. We assume happiness is somewhere ahead of us. Somewhere in the future. Somewhere after the next achievement, the next relationship, the next milestone, the next thing we finally get. And because of that, we spend so much time of our lives living in the mindset of when. When I get that, I'll be happy. When I achieve that, I'll finally feel good. When I become that person, everything will make sense. And the problem is, that word when can control your entire life without you even noticing. Because think about how often we say it. I'll be happy when I have more money. I'll be happy when I look better. I'll be happy when people respect me. I'll be happy when I find someone who loves me. I'll be happy when I finally become successful. And there's nothing wrong with wanting those things. Wanting to improve yourself is a good thing. Having goals is a good thing. Wanting more from life is a good thing. The problem is convincing yourself that your current life is just a waiting room before your real life begins. Because that's where a lot of people get trapped. They're always preparing to be happy, but they never actually allow themselves to be happy. But they never actually tell themselves they can be happy. And a lot of people can relate to this feeling. You're working towards something. You're exhausted. You're tired. You're imagining what life will be when you finally get there. And in your head, it feels like everything is going to change. Like all the problems you have right now will disappear. Like you'll wake up one day and suddenly feel completely satisfied with who you are. But then eventually, you'll get there. You'll achieve the thing. You'll reach the goal. And for a little while, it feels amazing. You feel proud. You feel relieved. You feel like all the effort was worth it. But then something strange happens. A few days pass, maybe a few weeks, and your brain starts looking for the next thing, the next goal, the next improvement, the next reason why you're not quite where you want to be yet. And suddenly the things you spent months or years chasing becomes normal. And I think that's one of the hardest things to accept. Sometimes the thing you thought would change everything doesn't. Not because it wasn't good, not because you didn't deserve it, but because humans are incredibly good at adapting. We get used to things, we get used to achievements, we get used to improvements, we get used to things that we once thought were impossible. And because we get used to them, we forget how badly we wanted them in the first place. I think about this a lot with social media and creating content, because it's so easy to think, if I just get more views, then I'll feel successful. If I hit a certain number of subscribers, then I'll finally feel like I've made it. And maybe you actually reach that number. Maybe you hit a milestone you were dreaming about. And for a moment, it feels unreal. You're proud of yourself. You look back and think how far you've actually come. But then your brain does something interesting. Instead of sitting there and appreciating, it immediately asks, okay, but what's next? And it's not even because you're ungrateful. It's just how our minds work. We're constantly moving the finish line. And I think everyone experiences this in different ways. Someone might think, once I'm in a relationship, I'll finally feel complete. Then they'll get into one and realize relationships still have challenges. Someone might think, once I have enough money, I won't stress anymore. But then they'll make more money, and their lifestyle changes, and suddenly they're chasing a bigger number. Someone might think, once people finally notice me, I'll feel confident. And then people notice them, but they still have the same doubts inside. And that's when you start realizing something important. Maybe happiness was never actually wanting or waiting at the end of the thing you were chasing. Maybe you were looking at it in the wrong place. And I think this is where a lot of people misunderstand happiness. They treat it like a destination. Like there's some point in life where you arrive and everything finally feels perfect. But life doesn't really work like that. There'll always be something you want. They'll always treat it like a destination. There will always be someone you could improve. There will always be another goal, another achievement, another version of yourself you think you need to become. And as happiness depends on reaching a place where no one is missing, then you're probably going to spend the rest of your life waiting, because something will always be missing. And maybe that's why some people can have everything they thought they wanted and still feel empty, because they spent so long believing happiness was something they had to earn, something they had to unlock, something they were only allowed to feel after proving themselves. But happiness isn't a reward you only get after becoming good enough. And I think that's something a lot of people struggle with, because we're taught from such a young age to constantly improve, get better grades, become more successful, work harder, achieve more, and again, none of those things are bad. The problem is when your entire identity becomes based around what you're achieving, because then in every moment when you're not achieving something starts feeling like you're falling behind. And I think that's so many people why they're tired, not because they're doing nothing, but because they're constantly chasing, always moving, always trying to become someone better, always thinking about the next version of themselves, and never really stop to appreciate the person they already are. Because imagine if you go back a few years and tell your younger self about the things you have now, the things you most wanted, the things that you once thought would be impossible. That younger version of you would probably be amazed. They'd probably think, how could you ever be unhappy? You've had everything I want. And yet somehow we still find new things to worry about, new things to chase, new things and new reasons why we just aren't enough. And I think that's the real problem with chasing happiness. Not wanting happiness, everyone wants that. The problem is believing it's always somewhere else. Because when you spend your entire life looking ahead, you'll stop noticing where you are. And sometimes the life you're trying so hard to reach is the life you're already living. I think one of the biggest reasons we struggle with happiness is because our brains are not actually designed to let us stay satisfied forever. And that sounds like a bad thing, but it's actually one of the reasons humans have survived and improved. Because imagine if humans were completely satisfied with everything they had thousands of years ago. Imagine if nobody wanted to improve anything. No one wanted better tools, safer homes. Nobody wanted to discover new things. We probably wouldn't have progressed the way we have. The same thing that pushes us forward is also the thing that makes it difficult to just sit still and appreciate where we are. Because the human brain is really good at adapting. Something can feel impossible one day and completely normal the next. Think about when you were younger. There were probably things you wanted to do more than anything. Maybe a certain toy, a certain game, a certain device, and something you thought would make you the happiest person alive. And when you finally got it, it felt incredible. You couldn't believe you had it. You were excited, you appreciated it, but then after a while, it just became normal. It became a part of your everyday life. And eventually, your brain started looking for something else, something new, something exciting. And this happens with almost everything. The thing is, we almost imagine a future of ourselves. We will appreciate things more than our current version does. We think, when I finally get there, I'll never take it for granted. But then we get there, and slowly we do. Not because we're bad people, not because we don't appreciate what we have, but because that's just how our minds work. We adjust. And I think that's why the anticipation of something is something more powerful than actually having it. Think about a holiday you're excited for. The weeks before, planning everything, counting down the days, imagining what it feels like. That feeling is powerful. Your mind creates this perfect vision of what's about to happen. The holiday arrives and it's great. You enjoy it, you make memories, but eventually it ends and the feeling fades. And suddenly you're back to normal life. And that's not because the holiday wasn't worth it. It was. The memories mattered, the experience mattered, but the feeling you once chasing wasn't designed to last forever. No feeling is. And I think that's something people struggle with. They think if something was truly right or truly meaningful, the good feeling would never disappear. But that's not how emotions work. Even the best moments in life eventually become memories. And this creates a cycle. You want something, you imagine it. You chase it, you get it, you feel amazing. Then eventually it becomes normal. So you find something else. And there's nothing wrong with having new goals. The problem is when you start believing the next goal will finally fix everything, because then you're not chasing growth anymore. You're chasing a feeling, and feelings always change. I think a lot of people have experienced this without even realizing it. Maybe you had a moment where you thought, this is it. Once this happens, everything will finally be okay. Maybe it's getting to a certain school. Maybe it was making a sports team. Maybe it was getting a certain amount of money. Maybe it was reaching a goal you had working towards for months. And when it happened, you expected this huge permanent chase inside yourself. Like you'd finally become the person you wanted to be. But instead, after a while, you were just yourself again. And that feeling is confusing, because you start wondering, why didn't this fix me? And I think that question is actually really important, because sometimes the problem isn't that we haven't achieved enough. Sometimes the problem is that we expected achievements to do something that we're never really meant to do. Achievements can make you proud, they can give you confidence, they can create opportunities, they can make your life better, but they can't completely remove every insecurity, every fear, or every doubt you have. Because those things don't come from circumstances, they come from how you see yourself. And I think that social media has made this even harder, because we're constantly seeing the highlights of other people's lives. We see someone achieving something and we only see the final moment. We don't see the years before it, the failures, the doubts, the boring days, the moments where we question ourselves. We see the result, and we compare their finished product to our unfinished process. And this creates another problem. We start thinking happiness is something other people have figured out. Like everyone else has reached this point where they're completely satisfied and we're the only ones searching. But the truth is, almost everyone is searching. Even people who look like they have everything. Because having more doesn't remove the human need to keep moving. And maybe that's why some of the happiest moments aren't actually when we achieve something huge. Sometimes they're random moments. A conversation with someone you care about, laughing until you can't breathe, a memory you didn't know would become important, a simple moment where you weren't thinking about the future or the past. You were just there. And I think that says something interesting. Maybe happiness isn't always found in the moments where we finally get what we want. Maybe it's found in the moments where we stop needing someone else to make the moment meaningful. Because sometimes the reason we miss certain memories isn't because they were perfect. It's because we were present. We weren't thinking about what came next. We weren't trying to upgrade the moment. We were just experiencing it. And I think that's something we lose as we get older. When we're younger, we're naturally more present. A normal day can feel exciting because we're not constantly thinking about the next achievement, the next milestone, the next version of ourselves. But as we grow up, we start living more in the future, always planning, always chasing, always waiting for the next thing. And maybe the hardest lesson is realizing that the future version of you that you're chasing is probably going to be looking back at you right now and wishing you would appreciate this moment before. Because one day, the things you currently have might be the things you miss. The current stage of life you're trying to rush through might be the stage you wish you could return to. And that's where we start getting into one of the biggest reasons happiness feels so difficult today. Because it's not just that our brains adapt, it's that we're constantly being shown reasons why we have isn't enough. And that's where comparison enters the picture. Because sometimes happiness doesn't disappear because we've lost something. It disappears because we started looking at everything we don't have. I think one of the biggest reasons happiness feels so different today is because we're constantly surrounded by reminders of what we don't have. And that might be one of the biggest changes between the world we live in now and the world people lived in before. Because humans have always compared themselves. That's not new. People have always looked at each other and wondered where they stand. But the difference now is that comparison is no longer something that happens occasionally. It's something we can experience 100 times a day. You can wake up in the morning, on your phone, and within a few minutes you've already seen someone who looks more successful than you. Someone traveling somewhere amazing. Someone making more money. Someone having a better body. Someone in a relationship. Someone achieving something you wish you have achieved. And the strange thing is, your brain doesn't always process it as just information. It processes it emotionally. It doesn't just think, that person is doing well. Sometimes it thinks, why am I not doing that? And that's where comparison becomes dangerous. Because comparison takes something that should be inspiring and turns it into proof that you're behind. You see someone else's success, and instead of thinking, that's possible, you think, I'm failing. And the reality is, those two thoughts come from completely different places. One comes from possibility, the other comes from insecurity. And I think that's the hardest part of comparison, is it's never actually ending. Because there will always be someone ahead of you in some way. Someone who is something you want. Someone who is further along. Someone who seems like they figured things out earlier. And your happiness depends on finally being ahead of everyone. You're going to spend your whole life chasing a position that keeps moving. Because even when you're ahead in one area, your brain finds another area where you're behind. Maybe you'll become more successful, but then you'll compare your success to someone who is even more successful. Maybe you're becoming more confident, and then you compare yourself to someone who seems effortlessly confident. Maybe you're achieving something you were proud of, but then you see someone who achieves something bigger, and suddenly your achievement feels smaller, even though nothing about your achievement changed. And I think that's one of the saddest things about comparison. It can make you forget about your own progress. You can spend years becoming something that your younger self would be proud of. Then you look at someone else's life and it can make you feel like you've done nothing. And that's not because you haven't achieved anything. It's because you're measuring your life against somebody else's chapter. And social media creates the perfect environment for this, because most people don't post reality. They post moments, they post achievements, they post the best parts. Nobody is updating the boring days. Nobody's uploading the boring days. Nobody's posting failure. Nobody's showing every time they felt lost. So you end up comparing your everyday life to somebody else's highlight reel. And that's a comparison you can never really win. Imagine watching a movie and only seeing the best scenes. You'd think the character's life was perfect. You'd think they never struggled. You'd think everything happened easily. But you're not seeing the real story. You're seeing the edited version. And that's exactly what happens when we compare ourselves to other people online. We compare our full reality to somebody else's edited moments. And I think this creates a really dangerous mindset where people start believing they're only allowed to be happy once they catch up, once they're as successful, once they're as attractive, once they're as confident, once they're as anything in general. But there is no point where everyone reaches the same place. Everyone's timeline is different, everyone's journey is different, everyone is dealing with things you don't see. And I think that's another reason comparison affects us so much, is because we confuse other people's achievements with our own value. Someone else succeeding somehow feels like it's taking something away from us. But it doesn't. Somebody else being talented doesn't make you feel less talented. Someone else being successful doesn't make you less capable. Someone else being loved doesn't make you harder to love. But emotionally, it can feel that way. And I think this connects back to happiness, because a lot of people are actually unhappy with their lives. They're unhappy with how their lives compare to somebody else's. And that's a huge difference. Because if you remove the comparison, you might realize there's actually a lot to appreciate. A lot you're grateful for. A lot you would never want to lose. It's almost like comparison changes the way you look at everything. You stop seeing what you have, you only see what's missing. You stop appreciating progress, you only notice distance. You stop seeing journey, you only see the gap between where you and where you think you should be. And I think that's why people can achieve more than they ever have felt and still feel behind, because the finish line isn't based on reality anymore. In fact, it's just being insecure doesn't disappear on when you achieve things. It just changes what you focus on. Because maybe that's why chasing happiness through comparison will never work. Because you're trying to find peace in a game that was never designed to end. There's no final ranking, there's no movement or moment where everyone agrees you've done enough. There's no point where nobody else is ahead of you. So maybe the question isn't, how do I be better than everyone else? Maybe the question is, how do I become someone I'm proud of, even when somebody else is hurt? Not because that's where the real peace starts, not when you finally win the comparison, but when you stop needing to. And I think this leads into something deeper, because if happiness wasn't found in achievements, and it isn't found in being ahead of someone else, then what are we actually searching for? What do we really mean when we say, I just want to be happy? Because maybe happiness was never the thing we're actually looking for. Maybe there's something underneath it the entire time. I think the biggest mistake when it comes to happiness is we treat it like something we have to find, like it's hidden somewhere in the future. Happiness isn't the absence of sadness. It's not the absence of failure. It's not the absence of struggle. Those things are part of being human. And honestly, if you removed every difficult moment from life, you'd probably remove a lot of moments that made life meaningful too. Because some of the strongest connections from our struggles, some of the biggest lessons come from failures. Some of the best moments come from imperfect moments. And I think that's something we all need to remember. The future version of yourself that you're trying so hard to become is still going to have problems. They're still going to have doubts. They're still going to want something else. Because being human means you always have another level to reach, another branch to climb. So if you're waiting to become a completely different person before you allow yourself to be happy, you might be waiting forever. Because the truth is, there is no final moment where everything becomes perfect. There's no achievement that permanently removes every insecurity. There's no amount of success that guarantees you'll never have another bad day. And I think that's actually a good thing. Because it means happiness was never locked behind some impossible finish line. It means it has always been available in smaller moments. The conversation with someone you cared about, the laugh you didn't expect, the random memory you looked back on years later, the progress nobody else noticed, the moments where you feel like yourself, the days where you are trying not to prove anything, the moments where you stop asking, what do I need next, and start asking, what do I already have? And maybe that's the biggest shift. Stop chasing happiness like it's somewhere and it will eventually arrive. Start building a life where happiness has room to exist. Because happiness isn't always found at the end of a goal. Sometimes it's found in the process of becoming. And if there's one thing I hope you take away from this video, it's this. Don't spend your entire life waiting for the next chapter to start. Because one day you might look back and realize the chapter you were trying to rush through was the chapter you were supposed to appreciate. The things you're worried about today might not matter in a few years. The things you're chasing today might not give you the feeling you expected. But the moments you're actually present for, those are the moments that become your life. Maybe happiness was never something you had to catch. Maybe it was something that was already there. You were just too busy running after it to notice. I don't think most people actually realize how early it starts. You don't really wake up one day and decide that other people's opinions are going to shape how you live your life. It kinda just happens slowly, over time, without you noticing. At first, it's small things, like thinking before you speak, replaying what you said after you've already said it, wondering if something came out wrong, or if someone interpreted it differently than you meant. And it feels normal, because everyone does it to some extent, so you don't question it. But over time, it starts spreading into more areas of your life. It's not just what you say anymore, it's how you act, it's how you sit, it's how you walk into a room, it's how you react to things. Even how you exist around other people starts to feel slightly adjusted. Like there's a version of you that naturally shows up, and then there's a second version that filters everything before it comes out. And most people don't even notice the switch happening. It just becomes their default. And I used to think I was just being aware, like socially intelligent, or careful, or just understanding how people work. But there's a difference between being aware of how you come across and constantly monitoring how you come across. Because awareness is natural, it flows, but monitoring yourself is different. It's heavy. It makes everything feel slightly less natural than it should be. And I think part of the reason it builds so quietly is because it actually starts off useful. Caring what you think Caring what people think helps you avoid embarrassment. It helps you fit in. It helps you learn social boundaries. It helps you not say things that might be taken the wrong way. So your brain learns early on that this is important. But the problem is, it doesn't stop at this useful stage. It keeps applying that logic to everything. Even situations where nobody is really judging you. Even moments where it doesn't actually matter. And that's where things start to shift without you realizing it. Because now you're not just living your life, you're also imagining how your life looks from the outside. Like there's always a second perspective running around in your head. Watching, evaluating, reacting, even when nothing is actually happening. And the strange part is, most of the time, people are not thinking about you nearly as much as you think they are. Everyone is mostly focused on themselves. Their own thoughts, their own insecurities, their own moments they're overthinking. But your brain doesn't naturally assume that. It assumes you're being noticed more than you actually are. So you end up living under pressure that doesn't fully exist in reality. And I think that creates a kind of quiet tension in everyday life. Because you're not just doing things anymore. You're doing things while thinking how they look. And that second layer changes everything. It makes simple things feel slightly heavier, less natural, more calculated, even when nothing is actually wrong. I think one of the weirdest parts of all this is that it doesn't actually feel like a problem while it's happening. It just feels like normal thinking, like you're just being careful, or aware, or socially switched on. But underneath that, there's this constant background process running where you might check how everything might be perceived. Not just big things, but small things too. The way you phrase something, the way you respond to a message, the way you act in a group, even the timing of when you say something. And you don't even realize how often you're doing it because it comes automatic. And I think social media has made this more intense without people really noticing. Because now there's always a feeling that something could be seen, even if it never is. You post something and immediately think there's instinct to check it. Not just likes and comments, but for meaning. Did that look okay? Did that come off weird? Did I try too hard? Did I not try enough? And even if nobody says anything negative, your brain fills in the gaps anyways. Because silence doesn't feel neutral anymore. It feels like interpretation. And I think that's where people start to lose the difference between reality and imagined reaction. Because in reality, most things you do are not being analysed by other people the way you think they are. But in your head, it feels like they are. So you end up reacting to that imagined version instead of what's actually happening. And over time, that starts shaping how you behave in real situations, without you even realising it. There's also this thing that happens where you start remembering embarrassment way more than others do. Like you'll think about something you said or did days ago, maybe even weeks, and it still feels present, still feels slightly uncomfortable. But other people involved probably forgot about it completely. And that mismatch is what creates a lot of unnecessary pressure, because your brain treats it like it's still active, even when it's already gone for everyone else. And because of that, you start trying to avoid these moments happening again, even small ones, even harmless ones. You become a bit more cautious, a bit more filtered, a bit more controlled in how you show up. And at first, it doesn't really feel like it's changing anything major, but slowly, it does. You stop speaking as freely, you stop reacting as naturally, you stop saying the first thing that comes to your mind, and you start saying the version of it that feels safest, the version that's least likely to be misunderstood. And the more you do that, the more it becomes your default way of operating. But the issue is, that version of you isn't fully you. It's a version that's being edited in real time, a version designed to avoid judgment rather than express yourself. And the more you rely on it, the harder it becomes to just act naturally without thinking. Because now there's always that pause, that filter, that check in your head before you do anything. And I think the deeper things understand all of this is that most people don't actually want to be judged less as much as they want to feel safe around being themselves. But those two get mixed together. So you start thinking safety comes from approval. And approval comes from something you chase without even realizing it. Not because you want attention, but because you want to feel okay existing as yourself in front of other people. I think at a certain point, it stops being about other people. It just starts becoming about you. About how you see yourself when you think other people are looking at you. And that's where things get a bit more subtle, because you don't really notice the shift happening. It's not like a clear moment where you decide to change who you are. It's more like small adjustments over time. Little edits to how you act, how you speak, how you present yourself. Until one day you realize you're not really sure where the real you ends at the filtered you begins. And I don't think most people ever consciously choose that. I think it happens through reputation, through experience, through trying to avoid discomfort. You start to notice that certain versions of yourself get better reactions than others. Maybe you say something funny and people respond well, so you lean into that version of yourself a bit more. Or you act more confident in a situation and it goes fine, so you try to repeat it. And slowly, without even meaning to, you start building a version of yourself that is shaped by what gets approval, by what gets accepted, by what feels safe socially. And that version starts becoming the default. But the problem is, that version isn't always fully aligned with how you actually feel inside. So there's this small gap that starts forming, because how you are naturally, and how you present yourself, and at first it's small enough that you don't even notice it. But over time, that gap can start to feel a bit heavier, because you're constantly aware of it in the background, even if you fully can't explain it. And I think that's where a lot of overthinking starts to become deeper than just overthinking. It's not just, did I say the wrong thing? It becomes, was that actually me or the version of me that I thought people would like more? And that second question is the one that sticks a bit more. Because now it's not just about how you're perceived, it's about wherever you're showing is even authentic anymore. And when that starts happening, you begin to rely more on external feedback than internal certainty. So instead of just knowing how you feel about someone, you start waiting for reactions. Did they laugh? Did they respond well? Did that land right? Did that feel normal to them? And if the reaction is positive, you'll feel okay. But if there's uncertainty or silence, you'll start questioning yourself more. Not just the situation, but you. And I think that's one of the most draining parts of it, because your confidence stops becoming something internal. It becomes something you're constantly checking externally. Like you're trying to measure yourself through other people's responses in real time. And that's never stable, because people aren't consistent. Their mood changes, their attention changes, their reactions change. So if you rely on it, then you're always going to feel slightly off balance. And I think the deeper issue is that you start forgetting what's actually you without thinking on the outside input. You start to second guessing your own instincts. You pause before you express opinions. You soften your reactions. You hold back parts of yourself just in case they're not received well. And slowly you become more shaped by avoidance than expression. Not because you wanted to hide yourself, but because you're trying to not be judged for showing it. I think this is where it starts affecting relationships and connection in a way people don't really expect. Because on the surface, it looks like you're just trying to be a good version of yourself around other people. You're being aware, you're being polite, you're trying not to say the wrong thing, you're trying to make a good impression. But underneath that, there's a kind of tension that starts to build without you noticing. Because you're not just interacting anymore. You're managing how you be perceived while interacting. And that changes everything. It makes conversations less natural, because you're not fully in them. Part of your attention is always slightly outside the moment, checking, analyzing, adjusting, thinking ahead. wondering how what you said would land instead of just being in what you're saying. And even if the other person doesn't notice anything, you feel it internally. The slight delay, the slight hesitation, that feeling of not being fully relaxed. And I think the strange thing is, people often think they're doing this to make connections better. Like, if they just act right, or say the right things, or avoid awkward moments, then people will like them more. But actually what happens is, the more you filter yourself, the less real the conversation feels. Because connection doesn't really form through the perfect behavior. It forms through honesty, through natural reactions, through moments that aren't planned or calculated. And when you start removing those natural parts of yourself, even slightly, people can still sense it. Not always consciously, but in a subtle way. Like the interaction feels a bit smoother, but also a bit less real, a bit more controlled, a bit less human. And I think that's where a lot of people get confused, because they think the goal is to be liked by everyone. But being liked isn't the same as being understood. And it's not the same as being connected to someone. You can be liked for a version of yourself that isn't fully you, but that doesn't always lead to something meaningful. It just leads to something safe. And safety isn't always the same as closeness. Sometimes the safer you try to be socially, the more distance you actually create. Because people connect to what feels real, not what feels perfectly adjusted. And when you're constantly adjusting yourself, even slightly, you start becoming harder to fully connect with. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because you're not fully present as yourself. And I think this is where some people start to feel a bit disconnected in their own relationships or friendships, even if everything looks fine from the outside. You can be talking to people, laughing, hanging out, being social, but still feel slightly separate from it all internally. Like you're there, but not fully there. Like you're participating, but also observing at the same time. And over time, that becomes normal, so you don't even realize you're doing it anymore. You just assume that's how social interactions feel. A bit of thinking, a bit of monitoring, a bit of holding yourself back. But it doesn't have to feel like that. It only starts feeling like that when you begin It only starts feeling like that when you begin prioritizing perception over presence. I think a lot of people assume that the goal is to stop caring what anyone thinks at all. Like that's not what confidence is supposed to be. Like that's what confidence is supposed to be. Just not caring. Being completely unaffected. But I don't think that's realistic. And I don't think that's even healthy. Because at some level, we're always going to care what people think. We're social, it's built into us. The issue isn't caring, it's how much control it has over you. Because there's a difference between being aware of how you come across and being controlled by how you come across. One thing is just understanding social reality, and the other is constantly changing yourself to avoid judgment. And that's where people get stuck. They think confidence means shutting everything off. But real confidence is more than still caring, but not letting it decide everything for you. And I think that's the turning point for a lot of people when they start noticing how exhausting it actually is to constantly think about perception. Not just mentally, but emotionally. Because it takes energy to filter yourself all the time. It takes energy to overcome simple interactions. It takes energy to constantly check how you might be perceived. And at some point, you start realizing the effort isn't actually improving your life. It's just making you more tired. And the funny thing is, most of the things you're worried about don't even last as long in other people's minds. People forget conversations. They forget small, awkward moments. They move on faster than your brain does. But if your mind keeps replaying things like they're still active, as if they matter, even when nobody else is thinking about them anymore, and I think that's where you start to realize something really important. There's a lot of pressure you feel socially isn't coming from reality. It's coming from memory, from anticipation, from imagination, from trying to control outcomes that are already done. from trying to control outcomes that are already gone. And once you see that clearly, something shifts. You don't suddenly stop caring, but you start questioning whether the thing you're worried about is actually happening, or if something you're actually projecting. And that small gap between those two things is where a lot of freedom starts. Because when you stop assuming every interaction is being judged heavily, you start relaxing a bit more. You start speaking a bit more. You start reacting without editing yourself as much. And when you start noticing that nothing really falls apart when you do that, in fact, things often feel better, more real, more connected. And I think that's where people don't really expect that. That letting go of overthinking doesn't make you less socially aware. It actually makes you more present. And presence is what people actually respond to. Not perfection, not calculated behavior, just you being in the moment without constantly stepping outside of it in your head. And maybe that's the real balance. Not trying to stop caring what people think completely, but learning to stop letting decide who you are in the moment. Because the more you do that, the more you realize you don't actually need to perform life to be accepted in it. You just need to be in it. I think after a while, you start noticing something a bit strange. Even when nothing is actually happening, your mind still feels busy. Like there's always a background thought running in the back of your head about how you're coming across, or about how someone might think, or whether you said something in the right way. And it almost becomes normal. Like silence in your mind doesn't actually really feel like silence anymore. It feels like something is missing. And I think that's where you realize it's not even about specific situations anymore. It becomes a habit of thinking, a default setting. So even when you're alone, even when there's nobody to judge you, you still kind of imagine it. You still rehearse things, you still question things, you still evaluate yourself from an outside perspective. And that's the part that's hard to notice, because there's no obvious trigger. It just runs in the background all the time. And the more it runs, the more normal it feels. So you don't really see it as anxiety or overthinking anymore. You just see it as how you think. But it's not actually how you naturally think. It's something you've built over time from experience, memory, embarrassment, comparison, and reputation. And once something becomes your default, it stops feeling like a choice. And I think that's why it's so hard for people to explain this feeling. Because from the outside, nothing looks wrong. You're functioning, you're talking to people, you're living your life. But internally, there's always this extra layer running on top of everything. A layer of self-awareness that doesn't really turn off. And sometimes you only notice it in contrast. Like, maybe you're in a moment where you forget about it completely. Maybe you're with someone you're comfortable around, and you're doing something you actually enjoy. And for a short time, you're not thinking about how you're perceiving it all. You're just there, fully in it. And afterwards, you realize how different that felt. How much lighter it was, how much more natural everything was. And that contrast is important, because it shows you that the heavy feeling isn't always the real you. It's just a version of you that's constantly monitoring, constantly adjusting, constantly aware. And that version isn't wrong, it just gets overused. It starts running when it doesn't need to. And I think another part of this is how people start linking their worth to reactions without even realizing it. If something you say gets a good response, you'll feel a bit better about yourself. If it doesn't, you start questioning it. Not just the thing you said, but you. And slowly, your brain starts using other people's reactions as a kind of measurement system for your own value. Even though those reactions are inconsistent, temporary, and often not even that meaningful in the long term. And the issue with that is it makes your self-sense unstable. Because now it depends on situations you can't control. People's moods, their attention, their interpretation of things. And that means your confidence also becomes unstable. It goes up and down based on external signals instead of internal. It goes up and down based on external signals instead of internal certainty. And I think that's where things start to feel mentally tiring, because you're always waiting for feedback in some form, even in small ways, even when nothing is actually being judged. You're still kind of checking, still kind of measuring, still kind of evaluating yourself through imaginary perspectives. I think when people start to step out of this mindset, it doesn't feel like a big change at first either. There's no moment where everyone suddenly clicks and you're suddenly completely free from caring what anyone thinks. It's way more subtle than that. It's just small moments where you notice you didn't overthink something as much as you normally would. Or you said something without fully rehearsing it in your head first. Or you just acted a bit more natural without immediately analysing how it came across afterwards. And those moments feel slightly unfamiliar at first, like you're not used to them anymore. But over time, you start realising something important. Most of the things you were worried about never actually happened in the way you imagined. The embarrassment wasn't as intense as your mind made it feel. The judgment wasn't as consistent as you thought it was. It wasn't as constant as you thought it was either. The reactions weren't as critical or as focused on you as you assumed. And the gap between expectation and reality slowly starts to change how you think. Because when you spend a lot of time caring about what people think, your brain builds this exaggerated version of social pressure. It makes it feel like every interaction carries weight, like every sentence matters more than it actually does, like every mistake is more visible than it really is. But when you start stepping back, you begin to see that most of this pressure was internal, not external. It's your interpretation of situations, not the situations themselves. And I think that's where things start to shift mentally. Because you stop treating every moment like it defines you. You stop assuming people are analysing you as much as you think they're analysing themselves. And you start realising that most people are actually just focused on their own experience. Not yours, not in detail, not in the way you imagined. And it takes a bit of pressure off everything. Not all at once, but gradually. Because you start giving yourself permission to exist without constantly correcting yourself. You speak a bit more freely. You act a bit more naturally. You stop editing every small thing in your head before it comes out. And you realize that nothing really falls apart when you do that. In fact, a lot of the time, things feel better. Conversations feel smoother. Interactions feel more real. And I think another important shift is when you start separating your actions from identity a bit more. So instead of thinking, I said something awkward, so I am awkward, you start thinking, I said something awkward in that moment. Just that. Nothing more attached to it. No bigger meaning, no deeper conclusion about who you are as a person. And that separation is huge, because most of the pressure comes from turning small moments into statements about yourself. And once you stop doing that as much, you start becoming more resilient socially without even trying. Because most of the pressure comes from turning small moments into statements about yourself. And when you stop doing that as much, you start becoming more resilient socially without even trying. Not because you stop caring completely, but because you stop overthinking everything to your worth. You start allowing things to just be moments instead of evaluations. What the hell? Evaluations. Sorry, I can't speak. And that changes how you experience everything. I think if you zoom out far enough, it stops being just about confidence or social skills or overthinking. It becomes a bit more human than that. Because at the core of it, most people don't actually want to be judged less. They want to feel okay being themselves while being perceived. And those two are very different things. Because you can remove judgment from other people completely and still not feel comfortable. If you still judge yourself first. if you still assume you're not enough, if you still believe there's a better version of you that needs to show up for people to accept you, that even in a room full of supportive people, you'll still feel that pressure. Not from them, from you. And I think that's the part that most people eventually realize at some point. That the voice in their head is louder than any actual comment you've received. It's more consistent, more critical, more present in every situation. And over time, you start reacting to that voice like it's truth. Even though it's just pattern you built over time from past experiences, embarrassment, comparison, and memory. And the reason it sticks so much is because your brain is trying to protect you. It's trying to prevent rejection before it happens. It's trying to help you avoid embarrassment before it shows up. It's trying to keep you socially safe. But in doing that, it ends up making you less free. Because you're always adjusting yourself for a problem that might not even exist in the moment. And I think that's where the real shift happens. Not when you stop caring about what people think, but when you stop believing every thought you have about how people see you. Because most of those thoughts aren't observatories, they're predictions. And predictions aren't always reality. And when you start noticing that, you start loosening your grip a bit. You stop treating every interaction like a test. You stop treating every reaction like a verdict on who you are. And you start giving yourself permission to just exist in moments without constantly evaluating them, even if it feels a bit unfamiliar at first. And slowly, you realize something pretty important, because people connect more with presence than perfection, with honesty more than control, with real reactions more than carefully constructed ones. And you don't get that by trying to be harder to be liked. You get that from being in the moment enough to stop editing yourself out of it. And maybe that's the real point of all this. Not becoming someone who doesn't care at all, but becoming someone who doesn't disappear behind their own thoughts when trying to be seen. Because the more you stay present in your own life, the less power imaginary stuff and judgment has over you. Have you ever been surrounded by people and still felt completely alone? Not because nobody was there, not because nobody was talking to you, but because somehow it felt like nobody really knew you. I think it's one of the strangest feelings a person can experience, because when you're physically alone, loneliness makes sense, you expect it, you know why you feel that way. But when you're in a room full of people, laughing, smiling, having conversations, and somehow still feel disconnected from everyone around you, that's when loneliness can start becoming something much deeper. And I don't think enough people talk about that. Because when most people hear the words lonely, they picture someone sitting by themselves. No friends, no family, no one to talk to. But I don't think that's what loneliness really is. I think loneliness is the feeling that nobody truly understands what's going on inside your head. It's feeling like you have thoughts you can't explain. Feelings you don't know how to put into words. Days where everything feels heavy, but if somebody asked what was wrong, you honestly wouldn't know what to tell them. And I think that's why so many people feel alone today. Not because they're isolated, but because they're disconnected. There's a difference. You can have hundreds of followers, dozens of friends, people you talk to every day, and still feel like there's nobody you can actually open up to. Because being surrounded by people isn't the same as feeling understood. I think we've reached a part where we're created and connected more than any generation before us. We can message someone on the other side of the world instantly. We can see what our friends are doing every hour of the day. We can join communities with millions of people who have the same interests as us. On paper, loneliness should be disappearing, but somehow, it feels like it's becoming more common. And I don't think that's a coincidence. Because connection and closeness aren't the same thing. Knowing what someone had for dinner isn't the same as knowing how they're actually feeling. Liking somebody's photo isn't the same as asking how they're doing. Sending a streak isn't the same as having a conversation that actually means something. We're becoming incredibly good at staying in contact, but not always as staying connected. I remember hearing somebody say the opposite of loneliness isn't being around people. It's being understood. And I think that's true. Because think about the people you're closest to. The reason they matter isn't because you see them every day. It's because you feel like you can be yourself around them. You don't have to think about every word you say. You don't have to pretend you're doing better than you are. You don't have to wear a different version of yourself. For a little while, you can just exist. And that's a feeling that's becoming surprisingly rare. I think one of the reasons for that is because so many of us have become experts at hiding parts of ourselves. We know how to smile when we're exhausted. We know how to laugh when we're overthinking everything. We know how to answer, "I'm good," even when we're everything but. Not because we're trying to lie, but because it's easier. It's easier than trying to explain something you don't fully understand yourself. It's easier than worrying you sound dramatic. It's easier than wondering if people actually think you're just looking for attention. So we keep it to ourselves. And after a while, keeping things to yourself starts to feel normal. The strange thing about loneliness is that it doesn't always arrive at once. Sometimes it happens so slowly that you don't even notice it. You stop texting people first because you're worried you're bothering them. You stop talking about how you're feeling because everyone else seems fine. You convince yourself that everyone has their life figured out except you. And little by little, you build walls that were only meant to protect you. Until one day you look around and realize those walls are the reason nobody even knows you anymore. I think almost everyone has had that moment where they're scrolling through their phone, seeing everyone hanging out, going on trips, laughing together, and you can't help but wonder, why does it seem so easy for everyone else? Why does everyone look like they belong somewhere? Why do I feel like I'm watching life instead of living it? The truth is, there's a good chance somebody else is looking at your life and thinking the exact same thing. Because social media has a strange way of making everyone look connected, while quietly making a lot of people feel isolated. And maybe that's because we're constantly seeing people's moments, but never their emotions. We see birthdays, vacations, achievements, relationships, celebrations, but we don't see the quiet drive home after a bad day. We don't see the nights where somebody feels like nobody understands them. We don't see the moments where someone questions whether they really belong anywhere. So without even realizing it, we start comparing our private thoughts to everyone else's public moments. And that's a comparison we'll lose every single time. I don't think loneliness has always came from having nobody. Sometimes it comes from believing nobody would understand you if you told them the truth. That's a completely different kind of loneliness. Because now you're not just alone. You're carrying everything by yourself. And after a while, even when people are standing right next to you, it can still feel like you're carrying the weight alone. Maybe that's why this feeling is so difficult to explain. Because from the outside, everything can look completely normal. You go to school, you go to work, you laugh, you reply to messages, you post photos, you show up, and yet deep down, something still feels missing. Not because you want more people around you, but because you're searching for something much harder to find. A place where you don't feel like you have to pretend. A place where being yourself is enough. And I think that's where loneliness really begins. Not when you're by yourself, but when you slowly stop believing anyone could ever truly understand where you are. And the scary part is, once you start believing that, it changes the way you see every relationship in your life. Because even when people care about you, you start convincing yourself they couldn't possibly understand you. And that's where loneliness becomes more than just a feeling. It becomes a mindset. I think one of the biggest reasons loneliness has become so common isn't because people don't care. It's because most of us have become incredibly good at hiding when we need someone. We tell ourselves it's fine. We convince other people we're fine. And after a while, we almost start believing it ourselves. Not because we are, but because pretending feels easier than explaining. Have you ever noticed how automatic the conversation has become? How are you? I'm good. How you been? Yeah, not bad. Most of the time, nobody expects a real answer. It's almost like we've all agreed to keep the difficult parts of our lives to ourselves. Not because we're dishonest, but because we don't want to make things awkward. We don't want to ruin the mood. We don't want people to think we're complaining. And I think one of the biggest fears people have today isn't being lonely, it's looking lonely. Because somehow we've reached a point where admitting your struggles feels embarrassing. People are scared that if they open up, they'll look weak or dramatic or like they're just looking for attention. And I think that's one of the saddest things about growing up. Somewhere along the way, a lot of us have learned that being vulnerable was something to avoid. So instead of asking for help, we just get better at pretending. I think almost everyone has at least one of those days where they ask, "Are you okay?" And for a split second, you actually consider telling them the truth. You think about saying, "Honestly, not really." But then your brain starts racing. What if they don't know what to say? What if I make things weird? What if they think I'm overreacting? What if they think I'm just trying to get sympathy? So instead, you smile. You say you're tired or stressed or that everything's fine, and the conversation moves on. The strange thing is, most people aren't pretending because of what they want to hide from everyone else. They're pretending because they're trying to protect themselves. Rejection hurts. Feeling misunderstood hurts. Opening up and feel like nobody gets it hurts. So if your brain starts thinking, if I can never say anything, I can never be disappointed. But there's a cost to that. Because every time you choose silence over honesty, you make the gap between yourself and other people a little bit bigger. Not because they stopped caring, but because they never got the chance to understand. I think about this a lot. How many conversations end just before they become meaningful? Someone says, "How you been?" You say, "Good." And maybe if either one of you have asked one more question, that conversation would have been completely different. Maybe somebody would have admitted they were struggling. Maybe someone would have realized they weren't the only one feeling that way. Maybe two people would have walked away feeling understood instead of just updated. But those moments rarely happen, because we're all waiting for someone else to be honest first. And that's what makes loneliness so strange. It isn't always caused by distance. Sometimes it's caused by hesitation. Everybody wants deeper connections, but nobody wants to be the first person to risk looking vulnerable. So everybody waits, and ending up feeling alone. I remember going through a period where nothing looked wrong from the outside. I was still doing everything I normally did, talking to people, working on projects, replying to messages. If somebody had looked at my life, they would have probably assumed everything was going well. But inside, it felt different. It felt like I was constantly surrounded by conversations that never went deeper than surface. I'd laugh at jokes, talk about random things, go home, and still feel like nobody actually knew what went on in my head. It wasn't that I had no one around me, it was that I never felt like I could talk to someone. Looking back now, I don't think people would have judged me if I had opened up. I think I judged myself before then they ever had the chance. And maybe that's the more common than we realize. Sometimes the biggest barrier between us and other people isn't them. It's the stories we create in our own minds. The stories that says, "They won't understand. They've got their own problems. It will just be a burden." We probably don't care as much. The strange thing is, a lot of people are telling themselves that exact same story. I wonder how many friendships could have become stronger if one person had simply said, "I'm not actually doing that great." I wonder how many people would have felt less alone if they've realized the person sitting next to them was quietly fighting the same battle. Because I don't think loneliness always exists because people are disconnected. Sometimes it exists because everyone is protecting themselves at the exact same time. There's another part of this that nobody really talks about. Sometimes you don't even know how to explain what you're feeling. It's not like something terrible happened. Nothing necessarily went wrong. You just feel off, empty, disconnected. Like you're watching life happen instead of actually being a part of it. And when you can't even explain it to yourself, how are you supposed to explain it to someone else? So you don't. You distract yourself, you scroll, you convince yourself it'll pass, you watch something, you just keep busy. Anything to avoid sitting with the feeling. But feelings aren't really ignored and they don't usually disappear. They just become quieter. And quieter doesn't always mean smaller. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about loneliness is that it only affects people who are physically alone. But some of the loneliest people are surrounded by others every single day. Because loneliness isn't... I think one of the biggest reasons for that is the way we communicate now. Most conversations happen through a screen. a few words, a couple of emojis, maybe a photo. Then everyone disappears again. And while technology has made it easier than ever to stay in touch, it's also made it easier to mistake contact for closeness. Because knowing what someone will do isn't the same as knowing who they are. Think about how many people you know, not just by name, people you actually talk to. Now think about how many of those people you can genuinely just tell anyone, anything. The number is probably much smaller. And that's normal. But I think a lot of us mistake having lots of connections for having meaningful ones. We chase more followers, more friends, more notifications, when really, most people are just looking for one person who makes them feel understood. Social media has also changed something else. It makes everyone's life look full. Every time you open your phone, someone is out with friends. Someone is celebrating, someone is traveling, someone is laughing, someone is posting another memory they'll probably look back on one day. And you're sitting at home doing nothing. It's easy to convince yourself you're the only one. You start thinking, everyone else is people. Everyone else is making memories. Everyone else belongs somewhere. But that's the illusion. Because people don't post the nights they stayed home feeling lonely. They don't post the weekends where nobody replied. They don't post the moments where they questioned whether anyone would notice if they disappeared for a while. They post the highlights. And if you compare your everyday life to somebody else's highlights, you're always going to feel like you're missing out. I think growing up makes this even harder. When you're a kid, friendships almost happen automatically. You see the same people every day. You spend hours together without even trying. You become friends simply because you're around each other. But as you get older, life slowly pulls everyone in different directions. People get jobs, people move away, people start relationships, people become busy. The people you used to talk to every single day slowly become people you only hear for every 3 months. Not because anyone did anything wrong, just because life changed. I think that's one of the hardest parts about growing up that nobody really prepares you for. Nobody tells you that some friendships won't end because of an argument. They'll end because both of you slowly stopped reaching out. Not out of anger, not out of hate, just because time kept moving. And before you know it, someone who knew everything about your life becomes somebody who occasionally likes your posts. That can be a very lonely feeling. Not because you've lost everyone, but because you realize life doesn't stay the same forever. The people who made your everyday life won't always be there. And while you'll meet new people, there's something strange about watching chapters of your life quietly close without noticing they were ending. I also think a lot of people underestimate how lonely it can feel to believe you're falling behind. You look around and it seems like everyone else has found their group, their relationships, their purpose, their place. Meanwhile, you're trying to figure it out. You start asking questions like, what's wrong with me? Why does it seem so easy for everyone else? But the truth is, most people are still figuring things out too. They're just better at hiding it. One of the biggest lies social media tells us that everyone feels certain. Certain about who they are, certain about where they're going, certain about the people around them. But certainty and surprisingly rare. A lot of people are quietly questioning their friendships, their future, their relationships, their identity. They just don't post about it. And I think that's why loneliness can exist even when you're surrounded by people who genuinely care about you. Because sometimes loneliness isn't caused by a lack of love, it's caused by a lack of understanding. You can be loved, you can feel unseen, you can be appreciated, and still feel misunderstood. You can have people around you and still feel like nobody knows the version of yourself that only exists inside your head. It's why so many people say they miss childhood. Not because everything was easier, but because connection felt simpler. You didn't have to think about whether texting someone first made you look desperate. You didn't overanalyze every connection. You didn't wonder whether you were bothering someone. You just knocked on somebody's door and asked if they wanted to hang out. There is something beautifully uncomplied by it. As we grow older, connection starts feeling like something you have to earn, and I don't think it should. Maybe that's why loneliness has become so common. Not because people stopped caring, but because everyone became so afraid of getting hurt that they stopped letting people get close enough to truly know them. And the sad part is, when everyone protects themselves in the same way, everyone ends up feeling isolated together. But I think there's another reason that loneliness becomes so difficult to escape. Because after you felt it for long enough, it changes the way you think. It changes the way you see yourself. It changes the way you see other people. And before you realize it, loneliness isn't just something you feel anymore. It becomes something you expect. You stop reaching out because you assume nobody wants to hear from you. You stop making plans because you assume people are too busy. You stop opening up because you assume they wouldn't understand. Not because anyone told you those things, but because loneliness has a way of convincing you they're true. And that's where it becomes a cycle, one that's incredibly difficult to break. I think one of the most dangerous things about loneliness is that it doesn't just make you feel alone. It changes the way you think. At first, loneliness is just a feeling, something you notice every now and then. Maybe after everyone goes home, maybe late at night, maybe when you realize you shouldn't really have anyone to talk to. But if that feeling stays around for long enough, it slowly becomes the way you see the world. And that's when it becomes very difficult to tell the difference between what's actually happening and what loneliness is convincing you is happening. You start assuming people don't want to hear it from you. Not because they've said it, but because your mind fills in the blanks. You send a message, they take a while to reply. Your brain immediately starts creating explanations. They shouldn't have texted. They're probably annoyed. They're just replying because they feel bad. Most of the time, none of those things are true. But loneliness has a way of making the worst explanation feel like the most believable one. I think everyone has experienced overthinking before. Reading a message 5 times before sending it, deleting half of it because it sounds stupid, wondering whether you use too many words or not enough, thinking about a conversation hours after it ended, asking yourself if you sound awkward, if you talk too much, if you didn't talk enough, if you should have said something different. And the more alone you feel, the louder those thoughts become. Because when you don't feel secure in your relationships, every interaction starts feeling like a test. Eventually, you stop taking chances. You don't message first because you don't want to seem annoying. You don't invite people because you're scared they'll say no. You don't tell people how you're really doing because you're worried they'll become a burden. At first, it feels like you're protecting yourself. You'll never risk rejection. You can never be rejected. But what are you really doing is protecting yourself from the possibility of connection too. I think that's the cruelest part of loneliness. The very things we do to avoid getting hurt often becomes the things that keep us lonely. We build walls because we're scared of being disappointed, but then we wonder why nobody can get close to us. We convince ourselves people don't care, so we stop giving them the opportunity to show that they do. Imagine standing outside a house with every curtain closed, every light turned off, and every door locked. Then imagining why nobody ever comes inside. That's what loneliness can become. Not because you wanted to shut people out, but because you were trying to protect what was inside. And after disappointment, the walls stop feeling like a choice. They start feeling like a part of who you are. I think another reason loneliness becomes so difficult is because it changes how you see yourself. You stop thinking, I feel lonely, and start thinking, I am lonely. It becomes a part of your identity. You start believing you're just the kind of person who doesn't fit in, who doesn't belong, who somehow misses whatever everyone else seems to understand. And once you believe that, every experience starts reinforcing it. One cancelled plan becomes proof. One slow reply becomes proof. One awkward conversation becomes proof. You stop looking for evidence that people care. You start collecting evidence that they don't. The strange thing is, People who care about you often have no idea you're feeling this way, because you're becoming so good at hiding it. You're still making jokes, still showing up, still smiling in photos, still replying with, "I'm all good." So from their perspective, everything seems normal. And that's why loneliness can feel so invisible. The people around you aren't ignoring your pain. They often just don't know why it's there. I think we've all had moments where we've wanted someone to notice. Not because we want attention, but because we're tired of pretending. We want someone to ask, "Are you really okay?" And then actually wait for the real answer. But at the same time, if someone did ask, there's a good chance we'd still say, "I'm fine." Because opening up is terrifying, especially when you spent so long convincing yourself nobody would understand anyways. And maybe that's why everything feels so isolated. We're all waiting for someone else to go first. We're waiting for someone else to be honest, someone else to admit they're struggling, someone else to break the silence. But what if everyone is waiting? What if the person sitting next to you is just as scared of opening up as you are? What if the friend you think has everything together is quietly fighting battles you know nothing about? We assume we're the only ones pretending, when in reality, pretending has almost become normal. I don't think loneliness is always the absence of people. Sometimes it's the absence of honesty. It's what happens when every conversation stays on the surface, when everyone talks about what they're doing, but nobody talks about how they're doing. When everyone is connected, but nobody feels known. And maybe that's why the smallest moments can sometimes mean the most. A conversation where somebody genuinely listens. A friend remembering something they told them weeks ago. Someone checking in without being asked. Someone saying, "You don't have to pretend around me." Those moments are powerful because they remind us of something we've been missing. Not more people, real connection. I think that's what we're actually looking for, even if we don't realize it. We don't actually need hundreds of people to know our name. Most of us just want a few people to know our heart. Because we don't have to perform for people we don't have to impress. People who make us feel like ourselves are enough. But if there's one final thing I think is important, because after talking about all of this, it's easy to leave with the feeling that loneliness is just something we have to accept. I don't believe that. I don't think loneliness is not real. I think it's painful. I also think that it's something we can slowly move through. Not overnight, not with one conversation, but one honest moment at a time. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about loneliness is that it means something is wrong with you. That if you feel alone, it must mean you're not interesting enough, not funny enough, not confident enough, not good looking enough. But I don't think that's true. I think loneliness is a part of being human. At some point, almost everyone feels like they don't quite fit in. Like nobody fully understands them. Like they're watching everyone else live life while they're still trying to figure it all out. The difference is most people don't talk about it. And that's why loneliness feels so isolating. Not because you're the only one experiencing it, but because everyone else is hiding it too. Think about how many people you walk past today. How many people you sat next to. How many people you've seen online. You have no idea what battles they're carrying. The person who seems the happiest could be questioning everything. The person who has hundreds of friends could still feel misunderstood. The person who has everyone laughing could go home and feel like they have nobody to talk to. We assume everything else is okay because they show them that version of themselves. Just like we assume we're okay because the version we show them. I think if everyone was completely honest for just one day, we'd realize how much we all have in common. The fears, the doubts, the overthinking, the feeling that we're somehow falling behind, the moments where we wonder if we're enough, the moments where we somehow feel like we're nothing. We spend so much time believing our struggles are unique, when in reality, they're often the very things that connect us. I also think it's really important to remember that loneliness isn't permanent identity. It's a feeling. Feelings change, even when they don't feel like they will. There are probably moments in your life where you genuinely feel connected. Maybe it was one conversation, a friendship, a relationship, one random night where everything just felt easy. If you felt that once, you can feel it again. Not because life suddenly becomes perfect, but because connection is something that's built, not found. And I know that's easier said than done. Opening up is uncomfortable. Reaching out first is uncomfortable. Being honest about how you feel is uncomfortable. There's always the risk that someone won't understand, but there's always the possibility that they will. And you never know which one it is if you never give people the chance. I think all about the friendships that probably never happened because neither person sent the message. All the conversations that's never happened because both people were scared of looking vulnerable. All the relationships that have stayed on surface level because everyone was trying to act like they had it together. It's strange when you think about it. So many people are waiting for somebody else to make the first move. Maybe that's why genuine connection feels so rare. Not because people don't want it, because everyone is afraid of being the first to reach for it. One thing I've realized is that the people who make you feel the least alone aren't always the people you've known the longest. Sometimes it's the person who listens without trying to fix you, the person who remembers the little things, the person who makes you feel understood instead of judged. Those are the people who remind you that connection isn't always about how many people you know. It's about how safe you feel, about being yourself. I also think we spend too much time becoming someone we'll finally become proud of, instead of appreciating the person we've already become. I think we deserve connection once we're more successful, more confident, more attractive, more interesting. That's not how you should think. But connection doesn't begin when you're perfect, it begins when you're real. The people worth keeping in your life won't expect a perfect version of you. They'll appreciate the honest one. And maybe that's the biggest lesson I've learned. You don't have to know the right words. You don't have to have everything figured out. You don't have to pretend you're okay all the time. Sometimes saying, "I've been struggling lately," is enough. Sometimes admitting you don't have the answer is what creates the most meaningful conversations. Because honesty gives each other permission to be honest too. If there's one thing I hope you take away from this video, it's this. The feeling of being alone doesn't mean you're alone. It doesn't mean no one cares for you. It doesn't mean you will always feel this way. Sometimes it just means you're carrying more than you let anyone else see. And maybe the people around you have been doing the exact same. So if you're ever feeling lonely, I hope you remember this. You're probably surrounded by people who have asked themselves the same question you're asking. People who have laid awake wondering if they mattered. People who felt misunderstood. People who smiled through days that felt heavier than anyone realized. You just never know, because they were hiding it too. Maybe that's why loneliness feels so common. Not because no one cares, but because everyone is trying so hard to convince everyone else that they're okay. And maybe the answer was never finding more people. Maybe it was finding the courage to let the people know the real you. Because the version of yourself that you try to hide from everyone else is often the version that's the one worth knowing. One day, you'll look back on this season of your life, the nights you felt invisible, the moments you questioned yourself in your life, the times where you thought nobody understood, and I hope by then you'll realize something. You were never as alone as you thought you were. You were just living through a chapter of millions that other people quietly understand. Maybe that's what connects us more than anything. Not the moments where everything is perfect, but the moments where we realize we're all carrying something. We're all trying. We're all hoping to be understood. And we're all a little less alone than we think. Have you ever replayed the same conversation in your head over and over again? You'd get home, lie in bed. Have you ever replayed the same conversation in your head over and over again? You get home, lie in bed, and suddenly your brain decides to bring back something you said 6 hours ago. Maybe it was a joke that didn't land. Maybe you stumbled over your words. Maybe you think you sounded awkward. Or maybe nothing actually happened at all. But your mind convinces you that everyone noticed. Everyone remembers. Everyone is judging you. So you replay it again and again, changing what you should have said, imagining how the conversation would have gone if you chose different words, wondering whether people see you differently now. The strange thing is, most of the people you're worrying about have probably forgotten the conversation already. but somehow you can't. And I think almost everyone overthinks. Some people overthink relationships, some overthink their future, some overthink every decision they make, some overthink things that haven't even happened yet. It doesn't really matter what your mind chooses to focus on. Once it starts, it feels impossible to stop. And I think that's because overthinking doesn't feel like overthinking when you're doing it. It feels like solving a problem. It feels productive. It feels responsible. Your brain tells you, if I think about this just for a little bit longer, I'll finally figure it out. But have you ever noticed that you almost never reach that point? You don't find certainty, you just find another question. That's what makes overthinking so exhausting. It promises answers, but usually creates more uncertainty. One thought becomes two, two becomes 10, 10 becomes 100. Until something that took 5 seconds to happen ends up living in your head for the next 5 days. I think our brains do this because they're trying to protect us. Imagine thousands of years ago. If our ancestors ignored danger, they didn't survive for very long. The people who constantly looked for problems, noticed danger first, they questioned things, they stayed alert, and because of that, they survived. Our brains haven't forgotten that. They're still trying to protect us. The problem is, most of the dangers we face today aren't wild animals or life-threatening situations. They're social. They're emotional. Instead of asking, is that animal dangerous? Our brains ask, what if they don't like me? What if I fail? What if I embarrass myself? What if I make the wrong decision? What if everyone notices? The survival instincts stayed the same, only the threats changed. And that's why overthinking often feels impossible to switch off. Your brain doesn't think it's making your life harder. It thinks it's keeping you safe. Every scenario it imagines, every possibility it considers, every mistake it replays, is all happening because somewhere deep inside, your mind believes it's protecting you from pain. But sometimes, the protection becomes more painful than the thing you're trying to avoid. Think about how many moments overthinking has stolen from you. Maybe you wanted to talk to someone, but you spent so long imagining everything that could go wrong that you never said anything. Maybe you wanted to post something online, then you imagined what people might think, so you deleted it. Maybe you wanted to try something new, apply for the job, join the team, start the business, ask someone out, but before you even had the chance to fail, your mind convinced you not to try. Not because you weren't capable, but because you imagined failure so vividly that it felt real. I think that's one of the biggest lies overthinking tells us. It convinces us that thinking about something is the same as preparing for it, but they're completely different. Preparing leads to action. Overthinking delays it. The more you think, the harder it becomes to move. Because every decision suddenly feels permanent. Every choice feels like it has to be perfect. Every mistake feels catastrophic. So instead of choosing, you wait. Not because you're lazy, but because you're scared of choosing wrong. I don't think people overthink because they're weak. I think they overthink because they care. They care about getting it right. They care about what people think. They care about making the right impression. They care about not hurting people. They care about not being hurt themselves. The problem is, when caring becomes excessive, your thoughts stop helping you. They start controlling you. Have you ever noticed how different your thoughts become at night? Something that seemed completely normal during the day suddenly feels huge. A message you could have sent starts looking different. A conversation starts sounding worse. You begin imagining situations that haven't happened, creating arguments that don't exist, preparing for problems that may never come. The room is quiet. There's nothing distracting you anymore. So your brain finally has space to speak. And unfortunately, it rarely chooses peace. The strange thing is, overthinking doesn't just affect big moments. It quietly slips into ordinary ones too. You reread texts before sending them. You delete messages because they sounded weird. You wonder if you used too many emojis or not enough. You question whether someone sounded different today, whether that full stop meant something, whether they're annoyed, whether you should message first, whether you should wait. Whether waiting too long looks like you don't care. It's exhausting. Not because any single thought is overwhelming, but because they never seem to stop. And maybe that's the hardest part. Because see someone who's quiet, someone who's hesitant, someone who takes a long time to decide, what they don't see is the 100 conversations already happening inside the person's mind. Every possibility, every outcome, every mistake, every fear. Overthinking is invisible, which is why so many people carry it without anyone else realizing. But here's the question that changed the way I started looking at it. What if overthinking isn't actually caused by thinking too much? What if it's caused by something much deeper? Because if that's true, then maybe the solution isn't to think less. Maybe it's to understand why your mind feels the need to think so much in the first place. And I think that's where this conversation really begins. I think one of the biggest reasons we overthink is because deep down, most of us are searching for one thing: certainty. We want to know that everything will be okay. We want to know that the person we care about won't leave. We want to know that the decision we're making is the right one. We want to know that the people see us the way we hope they did. But the problem is, life doesn't give us that guarantee. And when our brains can't find certainty, they try to create it. That's why we replay conversations. That's why we analyze people's reactions. That's why we think about every possible outcome. Our minds are trying to answer questions that sometimes don't have answers. Did they mean that? Did they actually like me? Did I say something wrong? What if things change? What if I lose this person? What if I regret this? The brain keeps searching because it believes that if it thinks long enough, eventually it will find the answer. But sometimes the answer doesn't exist. Sometimes there is no perfect explanation. Sometimes you have to accept that you won't know everything. And that's one of the hardest things for an overthinker to accept. Because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. Not knowing feels like danger. Your mind would rather create a painful possibility than sit with an unknown one. At least if there's a problem, you can prepare for it. At least if something goes wrong in your imagination, you feel like you've already experienced it. But the problem is, you end up suffering from things that never even happened. Think about how many times you worried about a conversation before it happened. You imagine what you're going to say. You imagine what they might say. You imagine how you respond. You create an entire story in your head. Then the actual conversation happens, and it's completely normal. Nothing bad happens. Nobody thinks you're weird. Nobody judges you. The situation you spent hours preparing for never even existed. But the emotions were real. Your brain reacted to an imaginary situation like it was a real one. I think this happens most often when we care about something, especially people. Because the more something matters to us, the more power our thoughts have over us. A random person's opinion might not bother you. But someone you care about, a friend, a partner, somebody you want approval from, suddenly every little detail feels important. A shorter reply, a different tone, a change in behavior. Something small becomes something your mind investigates. And this is where overthinking can become painful. Because instead of experiencing relationships, we start analyzing them. Instead of enjoying a conversation, we're studying it. Instead of listening to what someone is saying, we're trying to figure out what they really mean. We stop being present because our mind is somewhere else, trying to predict, trying to prevent, trying to protect ourselves. I think a lot of people don't realize how much their past affects their overthinking. Because sometimes your mind isn't reacting to what's happening now, it's reacting to what happened before. If you've ever been rejected, ignored, disappointed, left behind, your brain remembers. And even when something new comes along, a part of you is still trying to protect yourself from experiencing that pain again. It's like your brain creates a warning system. Last time this happened, it hurt. So let's make sure it never happens again. The intention is good. Your mind is trying to help. But sometimes it becomes too sensitive. It starts seeing threats that weren't any at all. It starts treating possibilities like facts. Someone takes longer to reply. Your brain says they're losing interest. Someone seems quieter than usual. Your brain says, I'm not important. But the reality is, there could be 100 different explanations. They could be tired, busy, distracted, having their own problems. But overthinking usually chooses that explanation that hurts the most. And I think that's why overthinking and insecurity often connects. When you don't fully trust yourself, you start searching for proof for other people. You look for signs that you're valued, signs that you're wanted, signs that you're enough. But when your confidence depends entirely on external validation, every small change feels like a threat. A good day makes you feel amazing. A small problem makes you feel like you're questioning everything. Your emotions become controlled by things you can't control, and that's not healthy. I think that's why some people can receive 10 compliments, but one negative comment stays in their mind all day. The positive things don't feel like confirmation, but the negative things feel like evidence. Evidence that fear was right. Evidence that maybe you're not good enough. Evidence that maybe people can see something wrong with you. But one person's opinion cannot define your entire identity, even if your brain tries to convince you otherwise. Another reason we overthink is because we confuse thoughts with truth. Just because you think something doesn't mean it's real. Your brain can create incredibility convincing stories. It can make you feel certain about something that has no evidence. I feel like they don't care. I feel like everyone noticed. I feel like I'm going to fail. The feeling is real, but the conclusion isn't always true. Imagine if every thought you had was written down and shown to you by someone else. You'd probably realize how many thoughts you believe without questioning. You'd see how many assumptions you make, how many situations you turn into something bigger than they actually are. Your mind is powerful, but power things still need to be controlled. I think one of the hardest battles for overthinkers is learning when to stop searching for an answer. Because sometimes the answer you're looking for isn't something that you can think your way into. Sometimes peace comes out of accepting that you don't know, that you can't control every outcome, that not every situation needs to be solved immediately. Because life isn't a puzzle where every piece eventually makes perfect sense. Sometimes people change, sometimes plans don't work, sometimes you make mistakes, sometimes things happen that you couldn't predict. And that's scary, but it's also what makes life meaningful. If we knew everything that was going to happen, we wouldn't really be living. We'd just be following a script. The goal isn't to never think deeply. Thinking deeply can be a strength. It can make you creative, empathetic, aware, thoughtful. The problem isn't having thoughts. The problem is when your thoughts have you. When you can't enjoy the present because you're trapped trying to control the future. When you can't appreciate what you have because you're analyzing what could go wrong. And I think that's where overthinking becomes exhausting. Because your mind is constantly trying to protect you from a future that doesn't exist yet. You're fighting battles that haven't happened, having conversations that haven't happened, feeling emotions for situations that haven't happened. And slowly, you forget to experience the moment you're actually in. I want you to think about this for a second. Let's say you post a TikTok that you think is going to be embarrassing. You feel like other people are going to judge it, and they might. But the thing is, people live their own lives too. They're not going to go home and think, oh, this guy just posted that cringe TikTok and talk to their friends about it all night. They have lives to live. Yeah, they might even chuckle about it, but the feeling's gone in a couple of seconds. They have bigger things to do than think about you and what happened that day. And that can apply to anything, not just that situation. Just remember that. Even if they do, it's only for a couple seconds. I think one of the biggest ways to overthink our lives and how it's slowly affecting us is it slowly takes away our ability to act too. Not all at once, not in some obvious way, but through small decisions every single day. A message you don't send, an opportunity you don't take. An opportunity you don't take. A conversation you avoid. a goal you keep delaying. And the hardest part is you usually don't notice it's happening, because overthinking doesn't feel like giving up. It feels like being careful. It feels like you're waiting for the right moment, waiting until you know enough, waiting until you're confident enough, waiting until everything feels perfect. But sometimes the perfect moment never comes. I think a lot of people believe confidence doesn't just be from overthinking. I read that completely wrong. Sorry. Let's try that again. I think a lot of people believe confident people don't overthink. They imagine confident people are just naturally fearless. They don't worry, they don't doubt themselves, they don't care what anyone thinks. But I don't think that's true. I think confident people have doubts too. They have fears, they have moments where they wonder if something will work out. The difference is they don't let those thoughts make every decision for them. They act even when they aren't completely certain. I think one of the biggest reasons overthinking has become so common too is because we live in a world where we're constantly comparing. Especially now with the whole online teens looks maxing situation. Because every day we're surrounded by other people. Their achievements, their relationships, their confidence, their success, their looks. And even when we know that social media only shows a small part of someone's reality, our brains still compare. Because comparison doesn't always happen logically. It happens emotionally. You see someone doing something you wish you were doing, and suddenly your mind starts asking questions. Why am I not there yet? Why does everyone else seem ahead? Am I wasting my time? Am I falling behind? And before you know it, you're no longer appreciating your own life. You're analyzing why it doesn't look like someone else's. I think that's where overthinking and comparison becomes dangerous. Because comparison creates questions, and overthinking tries to answer them. But most of the answers your brain creates aren't fair. You compare your behind the scenes to someone else's highlight reel. You compare your doubts to someone else's confidence. You compare your beginning to someone else's progress, and then you wonder why you feel like you're not enough. I think the hardest thing about overthinking is that most people don't actually want to think this much. But I think one of the most important things to understand is that your brain isn't your enemy. Your thoughts aren't trying to ruin your life. Your mind is doing what it's designed to do. It's trying to protect you. It's trying to prepare you. It's trying to prevent pain. The problem is, sometimes protection turns into restriction. Sometimes your brain becomes so focused on preventing something bad from happening that it stops you from experiencing something good. Overthinking makes you believe that if you think about something enough, you can prevent it from hurting you. If you analyze every possibility, you'll never be surprised. If you prepare for every outcome, you'll never fail. If you understand every person, you'll never get rejected. But that's not how life works. No amount of thinking can give you the complete control, because life has always been uncertain. And maybe the goal was never to remove uncertainty. Maybe the goal was to become someone who can handle it. I think a lot of people spend years trying to create a life where they never feel uncomfortable. A life where they never fail, never get rejected, never feel embarrassed, never make mistakes. But the truth is, those moments are unavoidable. Everyone experiences them. The difference is whether those moments become something that stops you or something that helps you grow. I think about it every time you're worried about it. Like, think about when you're worried about you shouldn't be able to handle something. A difficult conversation, a big change, a mistake, a disappointment. At the time, it probably felt impossible, like you wouldn't know what to do. But then somehow, you figured it out. You adapted, you kept going, you survived something your mind told you wasn't possible. And I think we forget that. We remember the moments where we struggled, but we forget all the moments where we overcame those struggles. Maybe that's the big lesson when it comes to overthinking. You don't need to trust that everything will go perfectly. You need to trust that you'll be okay, even if it doesn't. Because that's real confidence. Not believing nothing bad will happen. Believing that if something bad does happen, you'll be able to face it. I think another important step is learning to separate thoughts from reality. Your brain might tell you they probably don't care, but that doesn't mean it's true. Your brain might tell you you'll fail, but that doesn't mean it's true. Your brain might tell you everyone is judging you, but that doesn't mean it's true. Thoughts are possibilities, not facts. And learning that difference can completely change the way you experience life. Imagine if every time your friend has a negative thought, you treated it as truth. They say, "I'm not good enough." You wouldn't immediately agree. You'd probably remind them of all the reasons they're wrong. You would show them things they can't see about themselves. But when it's our own thoughts, we believe them instantly. We give ourselves no distance, no understanding, no kindness. And I think we need to start treating ourselves the same way we would treat someone we care about. Because a lot of overthinking comes from being incredibly hard on yourself. You expect yourself to say the perfect thing, make the perfect choice, have the perfect reaction, never struggle, never fail. But you would expect that from someone else. So why do you expect it from yourself? I think one of the best things you can do when you feel overthinking is ask, can I actually do something about this? If the answer is yes, take action. If there's something you can fix, improve, or communicate, do it. But the answer is no, then maybe the healthiest thing is learning to let go. Because worrying about something you can't control doesn't prepare you, it only drains you. Sometimes you don't need another hour of thinking. You need a walk, you need a sleep, you need someone to talk to. You need to do something that brings you back to the present moment. Because overthinking keeps you trapped between the past and the future. It makes you replay what has already happened or fear what hasn't happened yet. And while you're stuck there, the present is passing by. I think that's one of the saddest things about overthinking. You can miss your own life while trying to plan it perfectly. You can miss conversations because you're analyzing them. You can miss opportunities because you're afraid of failing. You can miss happiness because you're worried about losing it. You can spend so much time preparing for life that you actually forget to live it. And I think that's the goal, to become someone who never thinks deeply. Deep thinkers often see things other people miss. They notice details, they care, they understand people, they create, they imagine. Having a thoughtful mind is not a weakness. The problem is when your thoughts stop being something you use and it becomes something that controls you. Your mind is a tool, a powerful one. But you are not every thought you have. You're a person who notices those thoughts. You're the person who decides which ones deserve your attention, and sometimes the strongest thing to do is not find another answer, it's to accept that you already know enough. You don't need to know everything, just to figure out how it will turn out. You don't need everyone to understand you. You don't need every decision to be perfect. You don't need to become a completely different person before you deserve a good life. You're allowed to figure things out as you go. You're allowed to make mistakes. You're allowed to not have all the answers. Because at the end of the day, life was never really meant to be completely predictable. The moments that matter mostly come from things we couldn't plan, the friendships we didn't expect, the opportunities we didn't see coming, the experiences we almost talked ourselves out of. Sometimes the best parts of life exist on the other side of uncertainty. So if you are someone who overthinks everything, I hope you remember this. Your mind is trying to protect you, but you don't have to let fear make every decision. You don't have to solve tomorrow today. You don't have to carry every possible outcome before it happens. Sometimes you just need to take the next step, trust yourself, and believe that whatever happens, you'll figure it out. Because maybe the biggest thing holding you back was never the situation. Maybe it was the endless thoughts telling you why you couldn't handle it. And maybe the moment you stop fighting every thought is the moment you finally start living.